Okay, good morning. Ayin Beis, volume 3. We're more or less at the top of page 1279. 1279. I'm going to sum it up now. But before I do, okay, good morning. Ayin Beis, volume 3. I know it's repeating. I'm just at the top of page 1279. I just want to give me a minute. I'm just trying to find out. Sum it up now. But before I do. Okay. So top of page 1279, and we're in the middle of learning the Eifen HaMshacha, the manner through which mitzvahs generate and draw down divine energy. In brief, the whole purpose of existence is not just to exist, but to transform this world with Torah mitzvahs and make it adira b'tachtenim. So to make a home for the divine, you do that through following what the Creator's guidelines and directive, which is that's what Torah mitzvahs are. They're essentially God's blueprint and plan for creation. Call it the life's operator's manual. The mitzvahs are the instruments and the actual actions, speech and thought, and in general, the behavior of a human being aligned with how the Creator wants him to live. We live in a dark world, so there's free will, and we have a choice. And the objective is that we use our will properly instead of just following our own self-interest to align ourselves to the Creator's plan and to align the art with the artist, if you wish, or the structure of the building with the architect. And that is through Torah mitzvahs. So Torah mitzvahs, so you have here two parts here. One we call it chitzenius ha'er, or chitzenius, or yichud chitzeni of Abba ve'ima, that's involved in the divine process of creation itself, because to create, the divine godliness has to go through tzimtzumim, concealments, to allow creation to emerge, starting from the tzimtzum harish. Torah mitzvahs is another track, is the purpose of creation, is the inner intention in the creative process, which is what is lying at the heart of the artist or the creator or the builder, and what he wants with this structure. So the world itself is, as we explained, is dependent on the pnimius being nimshach and being generated through Torah mitzvahs. So besides the fact that Torah mitzvahs energizes existence and gives it vitality, it also gives it its very sustenance, because the whole purpose of it, like he brought from the Chazal, that God made a condition on page 1278. God made a condition when he created existence. Words were, if the Jewish people will fulfill the Torah, great, then the world will continue to exist. And if not, the whole world has no purpose. So bottom line is that the Torah mitzvahs draws in the very purpose of existence. So to use the language of Ayin Beis, we're talking here about the interface between the divine and existence. Who creates the interface? It's the human being, the neshamas, the souls that come down to this world. And how do they create the interface? That's through Torah mitzvahs. So you can say we are the active players, or the active players in this theater called existence, and Torah mitzvahs are the tools and the ways that we create the interface in a way that you see you reveal the divine in existence. Take an esrog, take a lulav, you take tzitzis, you take tefillin, etc., etc. All these things manifest the divine will, as we learned. Okay, that's a very general statement, which is basic. basic Yiddishkeit, if you wish. Now, as far as this energy that is generated, what happens to it? So even right now, even through the years in Elam Hazeh, High Alma, what he called High Alma, this world, there's all that is happening. He said clearly, a number of times, he said, Achshav, that this Amshacha be'emes keinu gam achshav, by just reading from the bottom of page 1276 and top of 1277, one of many places, that all this is happening now. But in a revealed way, now it's more limited in its revelation. So we have some of the revelation, like he said, that existence, that when there's more mitzvahs, the flow and the brachas, the blessings that come in b'chukesei telechu will be more apparent, will be more abundant. And when there's less, you'll see at least that the existence sustained. And in Gan Eden, obviously you have a bigger revelation, but it's still a revelation of the giluyim of it, not the etzem of it. When will the amitis aschar, the true reward, which means the true revelation of schar mitzvah, the very reward, the mitzvah of the revelation of the etzem ha'or, the pnimius etzem ha'or that we're talking about, the innermost, all the way to the helam, all the way to the helam atzmi, that will be la'asid love. That's why we say schar mitzvah b'hai al maleka, that the reward of mitzvah does not exist in this, is b'hai alma, we don't have in this world. What do you mean by schar? So he said that means the etzem aschar, the true full-blown schar, amitis aschar, that we don't have right now. We only have a certain dimension of it. And what we do have, like he said at the bottom of 1278, he said, Omnam achshav kol zes habracha v'ashefa. I'm reading from the bottom paragraph on page 1278. Melubish ba'al basar v'tzimtzum me'er eliki. It's manifest in a garment. It's manifest and enclosed, and a garment and a tzimtzum me'er eliki. And that's why there are gradations of how much Gili there is, some generations more, some generations less, some people more, some people less, in the revelation of that divine. In Atzilus, it's on a higher level and higher than Atzilus. Avala Asid, line 5, from the top of the paragraph, basically line 5 from the bottom as well. Avala Asid, ye is on page 1278. Ye is Galas Se'ed, Hanish is Gal B'chinis HaPnimius, B'chinis Yud-Kei Shebe Mitzvahs, the Yud-Kei without the garment of the Mem Sadik, that the Yud K gets exchanged with. Today, the Yud becomes the Mem and the Hey becomes the Tzadik. And also, Yagili Gamba B'chinas Vavke, that also on the outer level of Yud K Vavke, the Vavke, which is how the divine comes downward and manifests in the physical, will also be elevated. Acha B'chinas Vavke Yikma Yud K. And you have the Gili Er Primi V'Atzmi. And the Gili will be below as above. Those grade day, that hierarchy that exists today, that will be the Mata Kamay Lamaila, without any difference between Ruchnis and Gashmis. And also in the physical, you'll have Gili Era Atzmi. And Adarabah, this is the main Adarabah, the real punchline, that Ikar Hagilui Yeh Ba'Gashmi Atzma. The primary Gili will be in the Gashmi, that the Guf will be the primary force, and that, because it's coming from, it's rooted like the Kalim in a higher level than the than the Neshama, and that will in turn, like he said in the bottom of 1276, will sustain and also nourish the Neshama, the Ur. Then in the parentheses on top of 1279, the Rebbe Rashab added that this is the meaning, Yashlemer, the meaning when we say mitzvahs will be nullified, la'asid. It doesn't mean they'll be eliminated. It means that they will lose their significance. Will be, I said, overshadowed, will be completely nullified in the presence of a far greater light. But it's called heder tfisas makim. And I explained it with a bunch of examples. Why? Because the mitzvahs today, as we perceive them, compared to when the gili atzmi of their source in the etzem of the Ratzon Elyon of the Eibishter, and the etzem ha'or and the higher levels all the way in the helam ha'atzmi, what we have today will be nullified compared to that, but that doesn't mean it won't exist. It just means it will be revealed at far deeper core levels. When you see the etzem of something, its outer expression is obviously is invisible, frankly. It becomes like insignificant compared to the previous and etzem. It's like when you see the previous and etzem of something, so its outer dimension loses value in a certain sense. That's where we stopped at the top of page 1279. Okay. I want to just say one more thing before we continue on. Keep also in mind that throughout this whole process, he was going back and forth. Now we're clearly talking about Ma'aseh mitzvahs, but remember also he was talking about Kavonas mitzvahs, that in order to have a Gilui in Gan Eden, you have to have intention. But Kavona, which means the love, what he called Ava, B'chol Meidecha, Simcha Shal Mitzvah, the joy, the Ava Rabba B'tainugim, the different expressions he used, that what you need. So he said clearly the Schar Mitzvah, he said, for example, on page 1276, in a number of places, he says, on Ma'aseh mitzvahs pe'mamish le'ala ruchni shalahem. It's not on the spirituality of the mitzvahs, it's on the very actual mitzvahs. So in general, he called it Usa Deliba, Simcha Shal Mitzvah means the mitzvahs are not just being done mechanically and by rote, which also is kalim, but they're being done also with oir, so to speak, the kavana within it. So that is also vital here, because remember, the end, we don't just want the etzem, we want the etzem begilui. So it's true, etzem is being accomplished right now through mitzvahs. The gilui of it, in the fullest sense of the word, will be la'asad love in the future. But some gilui of it is revealed also in this world, like he said, and in Gan Eden, because we don't have only the actions, we also have the kavanah. So it's important to point that also well, because as I explained at length, that the whole last 50, 60 pages, avodah means not just that we have an etzem and a neshama, and our etzem is connected to God's etzem. That's without our avodah altogether. The very fact that God created kelim that are rooted in the reshimu, and the Rishum is rooted in the Helam Ha'atzmi, and the higher levels that are higher than regular revelation, that's a given by creation. That's nothing about us. The point is we should earn it. We should unite with it. We should internalize it. And that's where Torah Mitzvahs comes into play. Because it's not just about the connection, the fundamental connection. Like I'm explaining now in Tanya, chapters 4 and 5. That what's the point? Of course, the child comes, the son comes from the Etzem Moyach Ha'av. That's a given. By birth, we are a piece of our father. In Ruchnius, meaning the neshama, means the neshama is a piece of Chachmosei Machshavte Yisbarach. Ola b'machshava, like he explained in chapter 2 in Tanya. A child is not just a student, which is not created by the student is not a piece of his teacher. The student has seichel before the teacher was there. The teacher is revealing within him and teaching him and educating him. The teacher could be great. The teacher could actually give him a lot more than his parent can give him. But not the etzem mayachav is not there. So the etzem is there by a child. But then the other way around, a student could be more connected to his teacher and understand his teacher than a child can their parent. But we want both. We want the Ben and Evet together, so to speak, or the Ben and Talmud, if you wish. Ben Shanas Evet, Evet Shanas Ben. That what? That this child should also relate to his father. So in chapter 4, he talks about how he embraces his father through Torah and mitzvahs, like you embrace a king, even though it's dressed up, the king is in garments, which is the Torah and mitzvahs as it manifests in the physical world, like we're learning here as well. But the king within those garments. So it's not just the child comes from the Moyach Ha'av, Etzem Moyach Ha'av, but he also is embracing the king. In this case, think of the child also embracing his father. And even furthermore, in chapter 5, he says, when you learn Torah, you're even internalizing the father. You're internalizing, which is not just embracing him, which is a hug, but you actually internally, your mind becomes one, melded and one with God's mind, which is the Torah, all the way, which is one, and he and his mind are one. So the same idea here, that the mitzvahs is the etzem mitzvahs is mamshech the etzem, but you want it to be begili. You don't want just to be mamshech the etzem. You want to bring it begili, and the gili comes through the kavanas and through the avodah of mutfa murgish muskul as we grow in our emotional and cognitive growth and our emotions. our very subjective emotions grow to appreciate and ultimately be consumed with loving God more than anything else. Like we learned that the love of God is so all-consuming that you can't live without it. And that in turn makes the mind sharper and deeper because you want to connect with this level. So I just wanted to add that side because he hasn't mentioned it in a while. He will go back to it, but I just wanted to make sure we don't forget that that is part of the big flow here. With that, I will go back now, learn inside. I'm top of page 1279. I'm happy to take any questions if anybody wants right now. And if not, I will start after the parentheses on the 5th line of page 1279. The pages can be found at ayinbeis.com. Are there any?
Will the mitzvahs the la'asid have some effect? He said the ein aroich the mitzvahs of today, legabe the mitzvahs the la'asid. Will they have something la'asid?
What do you mean? Isn't that something? It's the same thing. It's the etzem of today. You're making it sound like it's not. It's the etzem of what today we have only a little piece of it. We only have the piece that's revealed to us. La'asid, you have it all. You have the whole etzem. When the etzem is shining bright, the little piece is all included in that. It's nullified in the presence of the great. The whole Indian of a mitzvah. Mitzvah is God's will. It's the etzem of what God wants in all of existence. Today, a part of it is nizgala in a revealed way when we actually have the mitzvah, esrig, a lulav, with tefillin, teira, whatever. La'asid with nizgala etzem sharshe, like he says a few times. He said sharshe mekere ha'atzmi. So you have mechal masayimona. You have everything from today, but much more. So therefore, the mitzvah says we know them today in their limited form, so to speak. Mem Tzadik will be bottled to the Yud K in the mitzvah.
So the mitzvah
performance, as far as the actual performance of mitzvahs, I said in the last class that there are two tkufas. There's a tkufa where there will be performance of mitzvahs and mitzvahs not tailored. The Alter Rebbe says it in Ageres HaKedesh 26. He explains it. He brings that you see that there will be certain halachas. There'll be a Beis Hamikdash. There'll be karbanos. Then there's a second tkufa where mitzvahs tailored. What he's saying here is the second tkufa when it will be bottled and you won't actually have ma'isa mitzvahs. That doesn't mean that mitzvahs will God forbid stop. It just means you're going to have the etzem of it. And b'meila, everything else comes with it. Whether we'll have to do physical mitzvahs, the answer is no. That's what means mitzvahs tailors. But you'll have everything that a mitzvah is supposed to accomplish, which is the Eibishter's etzem mitzvah. Yeah. Okay. Now he's going to say the next piece is going to show that this gilui of the Asid Lave, even though it seems exclusive to the future, there is a taste of it also now. So he's going to this next section till the end of the paragraph, or can't say to the end, but yeah, this next section is about a taste, like he says. Now let me just say this before he did give us. I remember two examples where he said he timon me'ein elam haba, the ovis tasted from me'ein elam haba, and also the concept elam chatir b'chayecha. That there are tzaddikim that have a taste of the geula even today. But we also know in Golus, even great tzaddikim suffered. So you cannot say that Golus is l'asad lave. He says, U'me'ein zeh hoye ba'adam harishon kaidem achet. Me'ein, from what we described by l'asad lave, was by Adam harishon, by Adam, before the sin of Eitz Hadas. U'kameshe kosev b'mokim acher, like it says elsewhere, and I remember we learned this probably in volume 1 for sure, and I think also in volume 2. Be'inyan hagimel shleimis, meaning 3 levels of completion, 3 levels of accomplishment. Adam, David, Mashiach. So Adam is an acronym. The 3 letters Adam is Adam, David, and Mashiach. Adam was, of course, the first human being, like Adam Kadmon, the first. Yitzir Kapav Shal Kadosh Baruch Hu, God created him in a perfect way. David represents in throughout history, David, Melech Yisrael, Malchus David, and Mashiach is the culmination of history, which is the Geula. And it talks about that all three are three stages, so to speak, in this Gili Elikus of Geula, with Mashiach obviously being the full-blown version at the end of time, at the end of the 6,000 years and the Geula. But Adam also is Me'enze before Chet Etzadas. Now, we're going to be learning soon, or already learning, Basiligani from connected to Yud Shvat. And more or less it says that there from the Medrash. What does it say? Basiligani, Ligani, Enksivkan, Ligani El Lignuni, like the bridal, the bridal chamber. So it's not just a garden, it's God's garden. The Gani doesn't say Gan, it says Gani, my garden, because the Shechina was, the primary Shechina was down below on earth in a revealed way. That's before Chet Etzadas. When Adam ate from the tree of knowledge, Adam and Chava, so it says Nistalka the Shechina, and it went to the Kiyah Harishin. The next generation of transgression made it go to the second Rakia, the second heaven, and so 7 generations degraded and concealed further and further the Shekhinah until Avram Avinu came. It's already been discussed and explained in places. What does the Mishnah says? Asara datas. There are 10 generations from Adam to Noach, and another 10 generations to Avram, but nevertheless 7 general stages. And Avram came and reversed the process. He was made it by revealing godliness and accepting and recognizing God and announcing to the world, declaring that there's that he announced the oneness of God in the world. He brought the Shekhinah from 7 to 6, Yitzchak from 6 to 5, Yaakov from 5 to 4, all the way to Moshe, the 7th generation from Avram, and he brought it back down for us in the Migdash after Matan Torah. So he brought it back to where it was by Adam Harishon before the sin. So by Matan Torah, like you had already a Gilead Lakus similar to by the beginning of creation. But then the Cheta, that's why the Gemara says Paska Zumasan, the Zuma, the Tuma, the impurity and toxins that were introduced by the tree of knowledge, the sin of the tree of knowledge, were paused by Matan Torah, but then they returned by the Cheta Ego, by the sin of the golden calf. In Tanya, chapter 36, says the Alter Rebbe, when he talks about La'asad Lava, he says, by Matan Torah was a taste of La'asad Lava, and now we understand that also by Adam, before the Chet, was also a taste of La'asad Lava. That's what he says, Me'enze. I think the word taste may not be tam is taste. Me'en means a similar level of revelation was by Adam Harishon.
What is David?
It's not relevant to the discussion. David is another stage. There's Adam, David, and Mashiach. As I said, in volume 1, he talks about these 3 stages. The main point is that Adam, before the Chet, has something similar to Mashiach. Ad shegam gufei, to the point that also Adam's body, his very body, kibal birchas Hashem kinishmase, received the bracha of Hashem like his soul. V'lo yitzarech lislabish b'levush v'tzimtzum klal, and he did not need to manifest in a garment and a tzimtzum at all. So let me explain what that means. Adam was not created from a father and a mother. So though he was made of flesh and blood, however, how was he formed? Yitzir kapav shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it says. It means he was shaped by God's hands. God took Ofer min ha'adama, exactly what it says in Chumash. He took earth from the ground. He shaped it like you would shape clay into a body, God himself. And then vayipach ba'apav nishmas chaim. And then he blew into it, he instilled into it, imbued it with a soul. So the very body of Adam was also one, not just a regular type of body. It was a divine body. Yes, it was offer min Adama because God didn't create it in heaven, but it's the offer that God created, and then he shaped it into this. So Kabbalah and Chassidus talk about what kind of body Adam Arishan had. And they say that generally a body is more of a lavush and a tzimtzum. When a soul comes into a body, you don't see the soul. You only see the life force of the soul. But the full divinity of the chelik elikam mamish you don't see in the body. That we have to work on through Avodah. You work on, refine your body to align it with the soul. La'asid lave, the body and the soul will be aligned, like you said at the bottom of the previous page. Gashmis will be like Ruchnis. And on the contrary, the Guf will have even a quality that it will nourish and reveal into the Ruchni. But today it's not that way. By Adam, his very body was a keli to the neshama, and like he says here, so it didn't have to go into the regular garment and tzimtzum that a neshama goes into when it goes into a guf, into a regular body. That's why when God vayipach b'apav nishmas chayim, the very neshama imbued him. So Adam Arishan was just on a higher level, both his soul obviously and his body. And we say Adam, we mean Adam of Chava, of course, because Zachar and Nekeva bara Esam. They were created male and female. So we're talking about man and woman, but they were originally as one. Ukamoi. And then he says, Ukamoi, I'm sorry. Ukamoi b'chaneich, tiksiv bei vayishalach chaneich. So chaneich, we know, had also a similarity. Vayishalach chaneich, so Chazal say that his guf, his very body went up to heaven as it was, as is. Like we speak about Eliyahu Hanavi. We spoke about this earlier. Because Chanech also was on that level, not quite like Adam Arishan, but a similar level like that. By Chanech. Chanech was a great-grandchild, how many generations after Adam? Maybe 3 or 4. Okay, regardless. Veisal Chanech. So he was an exception, because remember, we were already talking about people who were beginning to transgress. Chanech was a unique exception. Veisal Chanech. And then the Rebbe Rashab continues. Not just that, he's giving other me'ain where we have a similarity of la'asid lavi today. Meaning Be'elam Haza, in the world prior to Mashiach. Ukamay ha'ovis. Now he goes to the office. Shehena markova be'uvdes. Ta'achnos sorchim u'be'eres u'maklis. Kimitzvus el yenes mamish. Okay. So now the office. They were a merkova. Merkova means a chariot. Like the Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya, 24/7. Like a chariot. They were completely aligned to being a vehicle. A vehicle and channel of godliness in this world. And they did this, be'uvdes, through their activities, their actions of achnasas sarchim, inviting guests, welcoming guests, ube'eres, the digging of the wells, umakles, the digging of the wells was primarily Yitzchak, achnasas sarchim was primarily Avram. I say primarily because they obviously all did. And makles were the rods that Yaakov used in Parsha Vayetze to breed the sheep of Lavan. So these were kemitzvahs al yenes mamish. What they did were mamish, like supernal mitzvahs. Like we learned earlier, they're not begashmis. They're not mitzvahs gashmim. They did physical acts. They dug a well and they welcomed a guest was not a spiritual act. It was a physical act and the maklis. But it wasn't mitzvahs gashmis as we know them after Matan Torah as we learned. If you go back right here, I just want to refer where he spoke about this explicitly. Okay, back on page 1271. So if you look, like 9 or 10 lines from the bottom, so he said there that you need Maisa mitzvahs and Kavanah. For others, he says, Hoylem Gamkein Uvdes. They also had actions. They also were involved in some way. Himamish mentions these 3 things. V'gami krivu karbonis. The be'emes avedas avruchnis amitis ef shalias Bli eze uv the maisis. So even though he made it very clear, if you go back now to page 12, I believe, where he said clearly that this was the mila of Bonim over the others, because by the others they did not have Gashmis the mitzvahs. He also brings Achras Sarchim, Chfiris Be'eris Maklis, top of page 12. So that was, he called that spiritual work. Why? Because even though they did physical actions, but it wasn't the physical mitzvahs as we know them after Matan Torah. And yet he qualified on page 1271, there's still some hold in the physical. So he's saying now that the others were doing mitzvahs salyenis because they were ruchnis dika mitzvahs. He explained that at length. He explained that relatively at length on page 1211, that their mitzvahs were beruchnis. Because you didn't yet have, they couldn't have done, for example, tefillin physically where the Parsha speaks about Yetzias Mitzrayim. It didn't happen yet. He brings that on the bottom of page 1271. Or the mitzvahs tluyas ba'aretz. So you have to say they did them the way the mitzvahs were rooted in Atzilus. In other words, the spiritual side of them, but they did it with some physical act. So now he's saying they too have, so he says like this. So, Kamoi ha'ovish ha'inam recover ba'uvdis dachnos sochem be'erus ha'maklis k'mitzvah salyenis mamish al kain kiblu, they too, therefore they received birchas Hashem begashmis. They also received God's blessing in a physical way. Kamoi shehu lamayla beruchnis bli hester klal uklal. They received in the physical world like it is above in the spiritual world, similar to what he just said about Adam Arishan. And similar to what will be la'asid lave, without any covering at all. Klal, no covering at all. Ukamay shamru, like Chazal say, Gimel hitimon hakadosh baruch hu me'ein elam haba. There are three that God allowed to taste or gave to taste a taste me'ein elam haba. And who are the three? Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. What's Elam Haba? We just learned Elam Haba in the interpretation here is La'asid Lave. So the Rebbe Rashab, what is he adding here? Just to emphasize, he's not just trying to show us that there's a similarity. He wants to show us that even though the true glory and revelation of the Etzem Ha'ir and the Helam and Ha'ir and Helam Ha'atzmi of mitzvahs will be in the future, we also have examples of it in this world, which only makes the interface deeper. So though mitzvahs for most of us, mem tzaddik is the dominant feature, which conceals the yud k, and only la'asid lavi, but to say that we don't have it at all today, that's not correct. Throughout history, there have been examples, and he's giving them here, some of them at least, of this gilui also today, the gilui of la'asid lavi. And then he continues. So we have Adam so far, Chanoich, all similar to Adam with the body. I don't know if he says Chanoich is me'ein elam haba, but okay. The Ovis now, and now he says Ukamoi Kain, and so too, Hoyakam and Neshamas Gavoyas. There were a number of great souls, exalted souls, elevated souls. Shahoya begufim teherim gedeshim umuvdalim b'kol ra. They were in pure, holy bodies, sanctified and refined bodies, umuvdalim b'kol ra, completely separated from, completely removed from any negativity. We have a body, even if a person doesn't physically do something bad with the body, but the body itself has temptations, whether it's carnal temptations, whether it's other pleasures, and so on. But there were neshamas geveyas that were in bodies. We're not talking about neshamas in Gan Eden in heaven, that were in bodies in this world, that there were toyer teherim kedeshim uvdalim b'kol ra v'hoyu b'chaya leki gam b'chaya gashmi.
That was not Avodah.
They were b'chaya leki. They were living a divine life like Chaim Ruchnim, Gam b'chaya gashmi. Also in their physical lives are completely divine lives. Ukamoi, I will take questions out. Let me finish reading and learning with everybody, and then we'll take questions. Ukamoi, I mean, this is similar, that's mamish, but the Alter Rebbe says in Ageres HaKedesh, Simon Chav Zayin. So what does he say? He says, by tzaddikim, after their ptira, after their passing, ishtakich yatir, because they're even more present than before because now their bodies are not limiting them. And he says there clearly because the chai of a tzaddik, the life of a tzaddik is not chaim psadim. They're not life of flesh. The life of a tzaddik is ava v'yira chaim ruchnim, ava v'yira v'amuna. Love, reverence, and faith. We can have love, reverence, and faith, but you can't call that our primary life. We are physical beings that have spiritual experiences. And we love God. We can have reverence to God, faith in God. So he's saying that this, I think, is even stronger. In other words, Poshet Begashmius, their entire life was Chaya Leki. They were living in a body, but the body was a completely transparent container that was pure, like he said, Taherim, Kadeshim, Avdolim, Korah. It's hard to imagine, but there are such tzaddikim, neshamas gvayas. Ukamoi, and now he brings Elamcha tira b'chayecha. Elamcha, your world is referring to Elam Haba. Tira, you shall see it b'chayecha in your lifetime. In other words, not just in the future. Sometimes Elamcha tira b'chayecha, by the way, goes in Gan Eden, but sometimes it means Elam Haba, that you see it in your lifetime. So that the people who had. So that's an example, what he said before on the bottom of page 1278, of that there'll be a bli hefsher ben ruchnis begashmis. The gamma gashmis yegili era atzmi. Today, that's not the case. Gashmis is a physical world. There's a spiritual energy. If you do mitzvahs and you align it, yeah, you can align them, but that's not on its own that way. And I've given the example. I want to just, I think it'll capture it a little better. The Rebbe wrote once something, a beautiful, beautiful piece. The Rebbe wrote about the Gemara in Kiddushin, there's the machlekes, whether Maisa Gadol or Talmud Gadol. What will be greater? Action, whether action is greater or study is greater. Action or study is greater. And the Gemara concludes, Talmud Gadol, Shemevil de Maisa. Talmud Gadol Shemev L'Dei Maisa. Why? Because it has both. Talmud is greater, study is greater. Study is greater because it brings to action. But then it says in Sfarim that Mashiach will come, it says Maisa Gadol. Action will be greater. So the Klutz Kasha, this is in Chelik Chafei, look at the Sichos, volume 25. The Rebbe, the question is asked, why is that the case? Why would Talmud lose its power? Talmud Gadol Shemevil Dem, you have both. So why will Maisa action be greater than Talmud? So there was an answer in the Sikha that the Rebbe had given years before, and at the same time the Rebbe added a whole new sif, a new section answering the question in the most beautiful way. He says, why do you need to learn Torah? Because on your own, you don't know what to do. Your body knows when it's hungry. You don't need to open up a book to tell you, eat when you're hungry. The body craves hunger. And from the youngest age, we know that the body knows when it's tired. A neshama in this world, and the body in this world, does not know what mitzvah to do. So you have to have a shulchan aruch. You have to learn Torah. Torah tells you, here's what you're supposed to do in the morning. Here's what you do in the afternoon. Here's what you do in the evening. Here's what you do on Shabbos. Here's what you do Shemitah. Here's what you do on Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, Chanukah, Pesach, whatever. La'asid Lovei, the physical world will be as aligned with God's will and the Ruchnius, just like the physical body today feels hunger. You will feel the mitzvah. You will feel godliness. You don't need to go look into a sefer. And the Rebbe brings their examples. Even Mikir Tizak, the very stone in the wall will cry out. Today the stones are quiet. He brings there the example from Medrash that talks about Shemitah or Shabbos. If you go and try to pick a fig off a fig tree, if it's Shemitah or Shabbos, there's two different ways. The fig itself will cry out to you and say, it's Shabbos today, it's Shemitah today, you can't pick me. You can't take me off the tree. So once the world is saturated, you don't need Torah to tell you what to do. The world Gashmius is like Ruchnius. The physical world, just like your body knows it's hungry, you will know what's required of you spiritually. So that's why Maisa Gadol. Why then do you learn Teda, Loss and Love? So the Rebbe brings from Ageres HaKedesh 26, the one I mentioned before, you learn for Yechudim Elyenim, to connect to God's mind, not to know what's right and wrong. He actually brings their mitzvahs tailors, because you won't need for right and wrong, we'll know it instinctively. You don't need to go learn Teda to know what's right and wrong. But you learn Teda to connect to God on deeper levels, on and on, because the Teda at the end of the day is God's wisdom and God's blueprint and so on, and God's mind and God's will. So let's come to explain a little more what it means, a word like that. And today there are those that are ready, both on a spiritual level and on a physical level, that they experience in this world, both spiritually and physically, the future, that type of seamlessness between matter and spirit, between the divine and existence. And one more piece, and then I'll stop for any questions. This is a parenthesis. He says, like we see a number of Tanoim and Amoraim. Tanoim and Amoraim are just the sages of the Mishnah, and Amoraim is their students, the sages of the Talmud, of the Gemara. That you see a number of them were great, very wealthy people. Ashirim G'delim. U'k'may Rab Tarfon Asher Gadol Haya. Rab Tarfon was a very wealthy man. U'k'may Rabbi Elazar ben Chasim, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. These people were all very wealthy, the Gemara says. U'k'may Rabbeinu HaKadosh. So it's a fourth example. Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, Rabbeinu HaKadosh. Shaya Teira v'Gedula b'Makom Echad, the Gemara says. He had Teira, and greatness, Gedula here means wealth. B'Makom Echad. Sometimes a person has Teira, another person has wealth. He had Teira and wealth. That's an expression you use. U'k'may Rabbi Akiva, Sh'omer, Rabbi Elazar, Shema Chazu Shalom Kibul Rebbe Esei Lomei. In Sanhedrin, Daf Kuf Amud Aleph, 101a, Rabbi Akiva was wondering, since Rabbeinu HaKadosh, both in this world received Teira and Gedula, he was wondering, God forbid, maybe he already received his reward, Esei Lomei, in this world. In other words, referring to the fact that sometimes God does not give somebody full reward in this world because he wants to give them that reward in Elam Haba. But Rabbi Akiva was wondering why, because Rabbeinu HaKadosh's life was so blessed to the point that he was wondering maybe he received already Elamai. The point here is that we see these, so far he's mentioned.
Speaking about Rabbeinu HaKadosh or about Rabbi Eliezer?
I think he's talking Kibul Rebbe Eselami. I think he's talking about Rabbeinu HaKadosh. I have to
Rabbi
look.
Eliezer was the teacher of Rabbi Akiva.
Okay, so maybe I have to look inside. Maybe. That's a matter of looking up the Gemara. Al Kaponim, so he said Rab Tarfon, Rabbi Elazar ben Chasim, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbeinu HaKadosh, and now Rabbi Akiva speaking to Rabbi Elazar. So is he talking maybe about Rabbi Elazar? Maybe. I'll look it up. It's insane. It gives us the Maramokim. Very easy to look up. V'sheresh kulon, and the root of them all, the root of all these wealthy Teda people, Teda giants, Yosef HaTzadik, was Yosef himself, Yosef the Tzadik, Yosef the son of Yaakov, Ish Matzliach Gam Gashmius. That's the lashon of the pasuk. He Ish Matzliach. He was a successful man, also physically. Vashem Imoy Mamish, and even the Egyptians saw that God is with him. V'hainu b'chol asher hu Isa begashmius Hashem Matzliach biyodei k'moshu l'mayla mamish, which means in everything he did, begashmius physically, like everything he touched was gold, as they say. Everything begashmius, Hashem was Matzliach biyodei. God gave success in biyodei, meaning in his arm, but it means in everything he did. K'moshu l'mayla mamish, exactly as it is l'mayla, without any, in other words, a seamless success. Not just Beruchni, but how it came also on Gashmi Sa'il. So the Rebbe Rashab has now laid out that we see in history a number of people who had this a me'ain, a similarity to the seamlessness of Gashmis and Ruchnis La'asid Lavi. So first he began with Adam, and Chanech, and he brought the Avis, and then common Neshamas Gveyes without names. He brought Gufim Terim Kadeshim of Dalim, and Elam Chatir B'Chiach, Hem Begashmi, Ruchnis Hem Begashmis. And he brought examples for the Gashmis with these wealthy individuals. A good 5-6 examples here. One, yeah. And Yosef being interesting expression, Shadish Kulam. The root of them all was Yosef. So now, let me just finish summing this up. So now we see what he began in the beginning of this paragraph, that Achshav, today, the bracha is still manifest in garments. La'asad lavi, it'll be completely revealed, but we have me'enze by certain individuals, starting from Adam and others throughout history. And I explained the reason for that is because that gives us strength, even Bisman Agolis, even now, or Bisman Azeh, I should say, because not all these Bisman Agolis, that you would also have a taste of, or a similarity, something of the Asid Love. And this is not uncommon in Chassidus. It brings often that sometimes you have something now, like we had, like I said before, by Matan Teda, in order to give us the strength to be able to carry through and ultimately bring the Gula. So it gives us more hope and more strength and more power. That's where the Eibishter gives some individuals this type of schar, or this revelation of the mitzvahs in their physical work, in their physical lives. Okay.
And from here, as the neshama is a gvoyos, how you begufim kedoshim, it's not kind of voido. It happened to be that not because they were neshama is gvoyos. Hashem put the neshama is gvoyos in gufim kedoshim. That was, I don't know, a matan milmailo.
Well, Adam Arishan also Hashem created that way.
Yeah, he's combining them.
I mean, I don't see the problem. I mean, the fact is, there are people born with very great souls in very holy, sacred bodies. And remember, there are Vedas to maintain that. You can be born, you still have Bechira, even a tzaddik has Bechira. So it's true that it could be you're born that way. Listen, Adam Arishan at the end did contaminate himself.
Which is like a question, how was he able to do it? Because because
God gives free will, that's why. And Sof Kol Sof, it's a Guf Gashmi, and a Guf Gashmi that has, in a physical world, is a possibility. That's Chet Melosh Chson. The Rebbe talks about this. Chet doesn't necessarily mean always, it could be something they're not complete. At the end of the day, even the biggest Tzaddik Gomor, that is Kadeshim Teherim, and Shahid, like he says here, Kadeshim Teherim, Umavdolim Ukol Ra, also prayed for the Geula. They didn't say, you know what, we already have Geula here. Fact of the matter is, even such neshamas are not here in this world right now, and they want to return to them. The Gula Mitzvah Shlema and Tchias HaMesim B'chulu B'chulu.
It's hard to understand why these examples of great rabbis, personalities, Yosef Atzadik, that had greatness both in material and spiritual material aspects, are examples of getting schar in this world, because the preceding discussion suggests that the schar is just a pure revelation of Elokus that you get to see, get to Atzmos. It's all, I'm seeing almost entirely the spiritual realm, and not just spiritual, but in the sense of knowing God. Now, it's not to say that these rabbis with great Torah knowledge, didn't have a better insight into seeing Elokus, if you will, but it's a little bit different to say that they were very learned in Torah and very wealthy on the one hand, versus they're getting the...
I hear your question. I think it's a little misunderstanding here. This is not about schar. This isn't about reward. You don't see him using the word schar. He's using the word that the ein la'asid love they experienced, similar to la'asid. La'asid love is about seamlessness between godliness and existence. Today, for most people, it's concealed in some form of a garment, even though we have mitzvahs, and mitzvahs do bring blessings. Like he said, there were individuals who had a similar seamlessness between the divine and existence. It's not about insights. It's not about learning. It's about the fact that they were spiritual, physical, seamless channels to spirituality and the divine. That's the point that he's making, which is similar to the Gili Atzmi of L'Asid Lavi. It's not L'Asid Lavi Mamish, because they, as I just said, everybody needs the Geula, everybody, but you have an experience of it. And I explained before, the Eibishter wanted to make that even before L'Asid Lavi, we already can see an example of it, just like we see different examples that give us a certain like technology or other things that are giving us a taste of Shabbos, like on Erev Shabbos. So we're having a real people that lived a Geula Dika life in this world, meaning Geula as in seamlessness between their divine side and their physical side. And that was expressed in their wealth and so on.
I see.
Okay. Any other questions? What he doesn't address here, at least till now, is what about all the tsaras? What about all the Jews that suffered tremendously? The opposite of Gili Elikus. And so he doesn't address that here, most likely, because that's not the topic at hand. But the Rebbe Rashab did address it very sharply and very strongly in volume 2. I just wanted to say one thing about it, that in a sense, when we say that even though the blessings to the nations of the world come through Torah mitzvahs, so the Medrash does say that if the nations of the world knew what kind of blessings the Beis Hamikdash brought them, instead of destroying it, they would surround it with legions of armies to protect it. So the Golus is so deep, and the Tzimtzum is so deep that it's possible that even though even though the very existence is dependent on Torah mitzvahs, you could still have people who will go and destroy their very source of life. It's like that's how deep the Golus is. So it's sad, it's tragic, but it's also part of the reality that you could also go the other way around, and you see the exact opposite of Geula in the worst possible way. And again, the darkness is not just that they did something unethical. It's like going to the source of your blessing and spitting in your own well, destroying the very thing that gives you true sustenance. That's how deep Golus is. That's what the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya. That's a chesher kafel mechupel, a double darkness. The shoyim gevrim by, the wicked dominate. You can see the wicked prosper, the good suffer. Moli klipus sitra achre, and so on. So he doesn't talk about this here, not because the Rebbe Rashab was not aware. You could imagine this is being written in 1916. The world wasn't exactly a Geula world then. You know, it was the Russian Revolution. The Rebbe Rashab was already had to run away from Lubavitch due to the war. So, and he knew what was coming. So we're not talking about it. I just wanted to point it out that it's not the point he wants to make here. It could also be that he was being mamshech these hamshachas because he wanted to counter the terrible things that were coming. I always feel very strongly that the Rabbeim through the Chassidus and Maimarim came to somewhat weaken the hold of the darkness that was about to come. And it could very well be Ayin Beis, which was delivered, as I pointed out many times, right after the Titanic sank, and right literally at the dawn of World War I, and then of course World War II, that it could very well be the deepest Chassidus was being revealed in order to counter the forces that would come and do so much destruction. But at the end of the day, it doesn't contradict what we're saying here, because that's what Golus means. Golus means that the very God and the very Torah mitzvahs that God gave and the chosen people, the Jewish people, can be hurt, even though they're the very purpose of existence. That's how dark things can get. I just wanted to say a few words about that, so just to not ignore that point. But with that said, I would now continue in the next paragraph.
But you always say now it's getting better. You always say you can see the whole difference right now. That's what you always said.
It's not, I don't think it's based on faith. Look, we're sitting here learning Ayin Beis in the comfort of our warm homes without any fear of anyone arresting us or rounding us up. I mean, how could anyone not see that as a miracle in many ways, when for thousands of years this just simply wasn't possible? Yeah, and there were moments of respite and moments of peace, but on such an ongoing basis. The Golus today is mostly internally. Obviously, I know they're anti-Semites, and I lock my doors too. It's not like we're not naive here. But even secular thinkers, talk about the graph of the drop in violence and wars and bloodshed and the drop in famine and many, many injustices that once were so prevalent. Is it a perfect Gula Dika world? No, obviously not. We got plenty of challenges. But when the Rebbe says the world is ready, I'm not one of those that feels that the Rebbe, we don't know what he's talking about. You see it in so many ways. I mean, technology. Look at technology, the ability to bring Torah and mitzvahs, Chassidus to any person, any corner of the earth, 24/6, 24/7, whatever. I mean, whether it's being used by everybody, but that's just a matter. But once upon a time, it wasn't possible even to do it. So we can go on and on with that and discuss it. And I understand that people say, look, what about the whole issues with sexuality and gender confusion and political stuff? Hey, the Rebbe's Purim Mem Zayin spoke about it and said, right before the great Gilui will always come Yisbaru v'Yislabna Advarim, the bottom of the pot. So starts, you start seeing the pores as they open up. What you start seeing is the last remnants start becoming revealed. So you can look at it in two ways. You can look at it as things are getting worse, or you could see it as the gasp of Golus, and so on. And that's the way I approach it because that's how I learned from the Rebbe. And I don't really see another option, frankly. The other way we go would be depressing and saying, hey, tomorrow can be another Holocaust, God forbid, and we just made no progress at all. And all the thousands of years of mitzvahs and Mesiras Nefesh, where did it go? I don't know. I mean, to me, it doesn't seem like it's an option that I was trained to think that way. And I'm saying it from the Rebbe, not my own words. That's just where it comes from.
I just wanted that positive statement from you, just to get us out of the depression, okay. What you said before.
Look, there's tragedies. Don't understand. We have tragedies last few years. People, real tragedies. Young people dying. I'm not. I know what's going on. And people, as you know, talk to me. I'm quite aware of the sadness out there and tragedy. But you have to look at the same time as you see dark. You have to see the bigger picture and the general picture. Anyway, bottom line is, the question we always have to ask is, what are we going to do about it? And I believe our learning Ayin Beis and our struggling through this and trying to really understand it, and even now, understanding what Geula is. I mean, this is what the Rebbe wanted. He said, learn in Yoni Geula Mashiach. Now we're learning both Chassidus in Yoni Geula Mashiach, but now we're actually learning about Geula Mashiach in Chassidus in this section here. So I think this is meant to really, if you talk about applying Chassidus applied, this is meant to give us, I mean, we're not Rab Tarfon, we're not Rabbi Akiva, we're not Rabbeinu HaKadosh, but when you read it, you can say to yourself, okay, how far am I from this level of seamlessness between body and soul? And even if we feel that we are far and we're not going to achieve this, but at least there's a standard that we can aspire to. I find that empowering, we all know what's going on inside our hearts and our Yetzer Hara and different things, but it's empowering to know that this is achievable, even if we don't always get there, but at least we're running the marathon and we're trying to get there, or we know this is where we should get. To me, that's very empowering, because there are many people who don't even know where they have to get. They don't even know what the standard is. And that's much worse, because then you convince yourself that you're already there, or you convince yourself there are no standards. Here, at least we know, when I read this, maybe some people feel guilty. I feel elevated. I feel, hey, I love hanging around with these people. These are people who have that type of seamlessness. That story, Velvel Green, Professor Velvel Green, Olav Shalom, early Baal Tshuva from Minnesota. He was astrophysicist. I don't know what he was, some type of scientist. No, he was not astrophysicist. No, he was something, forgot what anyway. So he was Rabbi Feller. Rabbi Moshe Feller was the shliach in Minneapolis, St. Paul. And he came to see him. There's a lot of interesting stories went on there. But so I'm not going to go through all the details, but bottom line is, it was one of the first Kinus HaShluchim, the conference of Shluchim, he was invited to speak. So he got up and he said the following. He said there was a guy that was training to become a parachutist. He was in the military. He wanted to become a parachutist. You know, people go up and you parachute them behind enemy lines or whatever it is, or to bring resources. Anyway, the way it works is you go up in these planes, and in the beginning, you got to learn the ropes. So you watch, you help out, and you watch how they do it, because it's not so easy to do. Anyway, for a month passes, and then the sergeant, or whatever, the person in command tells him, your turn to jump. So he gets in line, he's so excited, they wrap up the parachute on his back, and all the stuff and his gear, and he sees those jumping, then he comes to the thing, he looks down. In Yiddish, they say, "Sevetem nicht gut." He suddenly gets a panic attack, looking down such heights, and he says, I can't jump. So the guy in command says, we've seen that too around here. Take another month. So another month of training, watch, build your courage, see how others do it. Anyway, another month passes. Long story short, he's getting in line. He looks down. Again, he can't jump. I can't jump. So the sergeant tells him, look, this is not made for everybody. You have to have a heart for this. You should join another part of the military. Maybe you should become a clerk. He says, no, I want to stay here. He says, what are you going to do here? You're not going to jump. He says, I want to help out. I'll help pack them up. I'll help give them a pep talk. I'll be here to help out. So the sergeant says to him, I don't understand. You're never going to jump. Why do you want to be here? So he said, I know I'll never jump, but I like to be around people who jump. That's what he said. So Velvet Green said like this, I'm never going to be a shliach, but I like to be around shluch. That's what he said. So sometimes I just felt it was an interesting way of putting it. Sometimes you read these levels and you may know I'm not going to be on this level, but I like to be around these people. They're like, they give you strength. And obviously, I mean a little more than that. We have to try to aspire, each one of us in our own level. That's really where I want to get to, not just to hang around them, but be at a cocktail party with Rab Tarfon and Rabbeinu HaKadosh and the Ovis and other Marishan, but also we learn something, like the story of Rab Zusha, that will be asked not why you weren't like these great people, why weren't you like you? But we all have these forces within us and the potential to do as much as possible. As the Rebbe once said, you don't always expect someone to change everything, but at least one little corner of your life or one moment, if you can experience this type of seamlessness, you already achieved something. And then from there, you can expand and work your way out. Anyway, a few words of inspiration.
Great stuff. Get the Fabring inside of class. It's not common. It's good stuff.
Yeah, this is meant to be a practical guide,
I looked.
Go ahead.
It is Rabbi Eliezer. He's talking about
Rabbi Eliezer, the Usher Gadol from the Gemara.
Yes.
Oh,
Clearly. So Rabbi Kiva thought that the uninterrupted prosperity and success Rabbi Eliezer was enjoying in his lifetime so exceeded the ordinary that it could only be explained as a special divine gift. So he was sure that the gift could only be attained at the cost of losing one's reward in the world to come.
Are you reading from inside the Gemara?
Yeah. Well, that's a footnote in the article.
Oh,
It's all
okay.
about-
Okay, so Rabbi Shlomo was right. I thought he was talking about Rabbeinu HaKadosh. You're okay. He's talking about Rabbi Eliezer, his own teacher, right?
Right. And very interesting discussion.
Is that Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah or Rabbi Eliezer ben Charsim, or that was a different Rabbi Eliezer?
Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkenus.
Oh, ben Horkenus. Okay, good.
Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua were his teachers.
Good.
Wow. Nice.
That's-
What was the Avos? Avram, obviously, the mitzvah Adam. The Avos was the mitzvah of Haknas Orachim. Yaakov was filling the sticks. The Yitzhak digging Beirot. Well, what mitzvah is that compared to? What mitzvah is that?
If I recall correctly, it was about, in general, removing the negative blocks, the klippos from the world. I don't know if it's a specific mitzvah. I don't remember right now. There's a specific mitzvah. I mean, he was Yira. Avram was Ava. Yitzchak was Yira or Pachad Yitzchak. I'm not sure. I have to see if the Be'eris actually symbolized some mitzvah. I don't remember right now. I know definitely removing blocks, that's for sure. Moving the obstacles to and revealing the Mayim Chaim, the Mayim. But yeah.
Also, where it said the goofing, the kamokein hayu kaman neshamos the gavos, shahayu begoofing tohorim kadoshim muvdalim mikol ra. They were separated from all ra. But Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and certainly Yosef, experienced a lot of ra in their life. He's thrown in a pit, sold, slave in the jail. I mean, Abraham was Ishmael and having to send away his kids. So I guess
he's not talking about negative things happening to someone. He's talking about a body that's not capable of, that is so pure, that's completely separate from any of the bodily temptations. That's what he means.
I mean, it could be that bad things happen to them, but they are not doing any bad actions, so to speak, negative.
Their bodies were Kadeshim, their holy bodies, you know. It's a very rare thing. That is why also they don't decompose. It says tzaddikim like this, their bodies don't decompose because there's no sin that ever touched their body. You say it's especially Pagam Habris, for example, and other things like that. I mean, that's not the only thing he's referring to, but that's usually part of it. They had nothing that the body ever did was a negative thing. It's a very, very high level. I mean, it's people whose bodies are extremely refined in that way. There were even people in the later generations that were mentioned. They were called the Halika. They called them the holy, like said about certain individuals that had such holy bodies. Either Kodesh, yeah, there was that. You have the Halika Rishonah. You have
in Gimel Tammuz.
They say about the old Belzer Rebbe. That when he met the Rebbe, he wore gloves because he didn't want to shake anyone's hand that was, it's called a sinful hand, so to speak. But when the Rebbe came by and he shook his hand, he took off the glove and he asked who he is. It's the same story they told about. I mean, I don't know. I've never verified it, but
he didn't want to leave. He didn't want to leave the hold on the Rebbe. He said, "Avarim ahant."
Yeah.
But Gimel
Tammuz, by the way, that same Belzerov, by the way. They tell the story. He never, you know, there's a thing about never looking in a mirror. A mirror is a sign of vanity. And also you see many of them cover their face. The Rebbe used to cover his face from pictures. So they say the Alter Belzerov never saw a picture of himself. He never looked in the mirror. Then somebody showed him a picture of himself. And he said, a Helikadid, a holy Jew. He didn't know it was him.
He asked who this is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I heard stories like that, but it just seems kind of weird because like you might see a reflection by a car window or something, like just by chance you see a reflection off the water or something like that. Not necessarily looking in the mirror, but off a metal surface or something like that.
But people who are so busy with God don't look in their reflections. They don't see the reflections. That's a different level. It's hard to imagine.
In Gimel Tammuz, they open it very close to the Frierdiker Rebbe, and part of the Oren of the Frierdiker Rebbe was revealed. And we're talking about the Oren was like new.
Yeah, I heard that. When they moved the Rebbe Rashab from to Rostov, in Rostov, you know, they were Eidim. This was like Tovshin dollar or something, Tovshin Gimel, Tovshin Beis. The Rebbe Rashab, because the government was building some type of highway through the oil where the Rebbe Rashab was buried, and they had to move him. So it was a big, big thing. You know, moving a tzaddik, moving a person is not some small matter. And the people that were there, they saw the Rebbe Rashab was completely intact. I think there was only something by his forehead here or something. They saw something.
And his foot, something is small, something.
Oh, maybe on his foot. You're right. Not on his foot. They saw something, but That he was-
Leivik was the Rav that made the whole entire thing. It was quiet. It was very dangerous. Nobody knew about it.
Who was
The
the
Rebbe's
Rav?
father, Rabbi Leivik,
Yeah.
he was the one that was the Rav there. There were 10 people there. They did it quietly. Somebody, a communist, gave his van, his talk.
Yeah. Okay. Let's continue learning. Okay. Ready to continue, or you guys want to absorb this all?
Let's keep learning.
Okay. We plow away. U'kamoy Cain, the new paragraph. So far, the Rebbe Rashab has answered several questions that he had asked. What means schar mitzvah b'hai al meleka? That there's no reward in this world when we know in Gan Eden. And even in Elam Hazeh, there is reward. We talked about here somewhat of it. So the answer is because we spoke about schar mitzvah, he's talking about the etzem amitis in aschar, which will be la'asad love. He also answered the question, what means in b'chukesei telechu? We do see, mikra mola dibra, we do see reward, so he spoke about that. But he still hasn't answered, what about those 5 mitzvahs that we eat? Echel miperuseim be'elam hazeh. Why are they distinguished from other mitzvahs? Either all the mitzvahs draw generate energy in this world, or they don't. So he's going to now say, he's going to come and answer that as well in this context. U'kamoy Cain, and so too, similarly, or Kamoy Cain, also, yesh mitzvahs pratius. There are individual mitzvahs, specific mitzvahs, shal yodam nimshach ha'ara gam achshav, that through them, a reflection of the divine also now is generated from the energy that will be revealed l'osid. Remember, I gave the example, there's an example from Chassidus, that all the mitzvahs generate energy and they're stored like in a treasure chest. That chest is closed. But now he's saying, just like we just said about these tzaddikim, that something, they get some revelation of it. He says certain mitzvahs also have the ability that through them you draw a reflection also now from this energy that will be revealed l'asad love. V'hein elo hadvarim she'adam eichel meperesein be'elam hazeh. And that's what the Mishnah says, that these are the things that a person eats from their fruits in this world, b'schar gashmi, with physical reward, me'ein haschar ruchni, haruchni de'elam haba. A similar ma'ain, like a similar to the schar ruchni de'elam haba, which he's referring to as l'asad, like he just said. It's interesting he calls it schar ruchni when we know it's also going to be schar gashmi. Because l'asad lavi, we're also, the physical world is also going to be madanim etzim ka'afar. Pleasures, delights will be abound. It'll be a world of no death, no famine, no war. So why is he using the word ruchni? I guess he means ruchni here, not just the spiritual, he means also the highest levels of the divine that are not just what we see with our physical eyes. I think that's what he means here by ruchni. Just pointing that out. Okay. Ubezem ucholokim. And this, remember the question of why these 5. It says, Ubezem ucholokim, and this is what distinguishes them, what separates them, mitzvah selu, these mitzvahs, mishari ha-mitzvahs, from the other mitzvahs, sheyesh aleim gam ki eskar ba'elam hazeh. This is what distinguishes them from the other mitzvahs that also have skar in this world, like we learned before. And what's the distinction? So he says like this: the shari ha-mitzvahs, by other mitzvahs, not these 5. Hamshachim ibchinas vavke shebe mitzvah. The hamshacha is from vavke in the mitzvah, meaning the lower level of the oyed as it relates to existence. Umebchinis Yudke, Kamaishu Bechiluf Asfin canal. And also from Yudke, but the way it manifests through the garment, through the exchange of letters, to Mem Tzadik. The Elu HaMitzvahs, and these mitzvahs, these 5, however, well, now he doesn't say 5, but before he said 5, but these specific mitzvahs, so all mitzvahs have something that they generate and they draw into this world. But these specific mitzvahs have something additional, that they eat from fruit, which is the growth. Fruit is not just, why say echel peresehan? You're not just eating from some revelation, but from the very fruit that grew and revealed of the ha'ara from B'chinas Yudke itself, undiluted, unmasked, and not as it goes through Mem Tzadik of the Chilufei Aspen. V'hi ha'ara atzmius. And this is not just a reflection, it's a core essential reflection. It's still a ha'ara, obviously, because first of all, it's not l'asud lavei, and second of all, it's not etzem, but it's ha'ara atzmi, it's not just a reflection, a core reflection. And the second half of the statement is, that's the fruits. And what happens with the dividends, that's the dividends. And what happens with the keren, with the principle? So he says, "Va'keren kayemes le'elam haba." The keren, the principle, that we don't have today. That will be preserved le'elam haba. What is keren? Keren ubchinas ha'atzmi itself. U'kumoy vayoran keren la'amoy. Keren in keren means sometimes the horn, but keren also means a principle. Keren refers to the etzem of something. That they vayoram keren la'amei, when you say that keren is referring to lifting the very dignity and the very essential dignity of la'amei to the nation. We learned this earlier. Vayoram keren l'mashiche as well. Navai yechatem merivov. All the way back, the Yarim Kerem Mashiach. We're going to learn about it a little later in the Hemshel. Just a second, let me just see. There's the mark of Yarim Kerem Mashiach. So Keren is, technically speaking, when you can how do you say when they anoint. So you anoint sometimes with a Keren, with like a horn, or you can anoint with a pach, which is a small little crucible. So keren sometimes refers to the horn. But for example, when we say karnei hoid, by Moshe Rabbeinu, you say the rays of light, it's a ray. Keren is also keren oir. So keren is a ray of light. So in the Sfarim in Nigla, in the Gemara, Chassidus brings it, keren refers to an atzmi zdika revelation. So what he's saying here is like this. All mitzvahs generate oir, that's for sure. But for all mitzvahs, it comes through Vavke and the Yudke as it manifests in Mem Tzadik in the exchange. These mitzvahs that he's talking about in this Chazal, that you say, Peresein Eichel Mehem, Adam Eichel Peresein Be'elam Hazeh, that we eat its fruit. The fruit are the dividends from the Keren of Elam Haba. So you're getting a core reflection of Yudke itself, and the very etzem of Yudke, the full etzem of it, that will be revealed la'asid lavid, Elam Haba, Atzmi, V'yam Keren La'am. The B'chinas Atzmi is Gala la'asid. The very Atzmi, the very core will be revealed la'asid, but we can get somewhat of a taste of it or a reflection of that core today. But he didn't yet explain why and which mitzvahs they are. I believe that's what he's going to do next. Now, I asked the question, how many, we say it every morning in davening, the mitzvah seilu sh'adam eichel peresein ken kayem s'leilam haba. But if I recall correctly, there aren't 5. And yet, the Rebbe Rashab did say...
No, 5. Why 5? Why 5? It said, Kibud Avoem, Gmilus Chasadim, Ashkom Beis HaMedrash, Achnos HaSeichim, Bikor Cholim, Achnos HaSkalo, Havayas HaMeis,
Right.
and weiter. It's not 5.
I know that, but earlier he said, I'm going to just point it out. 1 second. 1 second. I think earlier he did say 5. How many are there total in that what you just read? Well, from every morning, what do we say? 8?
Yeah, but he says at the bottom of page 1212, he says, the Mishnah Hey Dvarim.
Hey Dvarim, that's right. That's where I got it from.
The third line from the bottom, 12.
But there are actually 12 what you just counted up, Shema, 12? Yeah, the bottom of page 1212, correct. Can someone count how many there are?
10.
Doing it now.
10.
10.
10.
So I'm not sure why he said hey. I looked it up at the time and I could not find why he said hey. Okay, now he's not saying hey, so good. So let's stick to what he says. But he's going to spell out what they are. He says Va'atam, and the reason, the Elo Hadvarim Dafka, and what's the reason that Dafka, these mitzvahs, these items, a person eats from their fruits in this world, because these mitzvahs are in the Gimel Rishenis, which is usually Keser, Chachma, Bina, and primarily the level of Keser, which is Keren.
It's interesting that in the beginning it said Elu Dvorim she'ein lahem Shiur, and here you have 5, but he's not talking about it.
Then it goes on to say Elu Dvarim she'adam ochel perotei v'olam hazeh, and that's 10.
Right.
Okay, we got to find out what it means. But on 12:12, correct, he does say hey Dvarim. Okay. Let's see what he's going to say here. Maybe there'll be something here. Okay. Dehine. So now, I'll read a few more lines. Dehine kibud ava'im, honoring your parents, hu b'chachma bina. That's a chachma bina. Omnam zeh b'chinas yichud pnimi da'aba v'imo lahelad neshamas. So though it's chachma bina, but it's more than Chachman Bina itself, is the pnimius of Chachman Bina, of Avima, to give birth to souls, like we learned earlier, that Yichud Pnimi gives birth actually to children. It's not just the Moichin as they guide Amidis, but we're talking about actually giving birth to Neshamas. Like we know a child is from the core mind of the father, like he says in Tanya chapter 2. The Pnimius are Chachmat Bina, which draws from the inner and core of Ein Sof, or Commotion is Bar Le'il. The Inyan Kibud Aveim, who Amshachem Abba Ve'ima Lazun, and when you say in the midst of honoring father and mother, Chachmat Bina, is the Amshacha of Abba Ve'ima to Zoa Malchus, I'm not sure where he's going yet with this, but that's what he says. This is from drawing from Yudke, which is Chachman Bina, to Vavke, which is Zon Malchus. And this is what it says elsewhere, being where it says that the hearts of the fathers will return through this bonim, through the children. The bezun yeir v'izgala kamei ba'aba v'ima mamish. So here he's teaching it like this, that in Zohar Malchus, in the Bonim, will radiate and reveal the way it is in Chochmah Bina Mamish. Lev Ovis Al Bonim. V'hainu, Shavov Ke'yeh, Kamei B'chinas Yudke. That Zohar Malchus Bonim will be on the same level as Yudke's Chochmah Bina. U'kamei Shekosab L'kut Terem Arizal, like it's written in L'kut Terem of the Arizal, Al Posuk B'yemahu Yiyah. Yeah, the word Yiyah, Yudke. The bezun es spheres gamke b'chinas kfiyas kamay baba ve'ima v'aziyah vavke kamay Yudke. That Zohar Malchus will be elevated to a point that the 10 spheres will be permanent. They won't be in a diminished level. They'll be permanent, which means they'll be exactly on the same level as Chochmah Bina, which means Vavke will be like Yudke. I am Mashas Bar Le'il, Dibra Maskul Pada B'Shalom. He refers us back to Pada B'Shalom, which he already seconded earlier as well. Yeah. On page 1277, he also referred to that Maimer. I want to just see what he said there. Oh, yeah, Vavke Kama Yudke, yeah. V'nimtza, so we derive from this, Shezeu Amitis Hagili de L'Osid Canal. This is the true Gili of L'Osid, where Vavke will be like Yudke. So therefore, Kibud Ava Aim is Taka Chochmah Bina, but it's Pnimius Chochmah Bina. And Chochmah Bina, Yudke, as it radiates into Vavke, that Vavke is on the level of Yudke like L'Osid. And what is that in Aveda? Uba Aveda, Ubchinas HaMuskel, the godless Abba. Okay. Is that cognitive growth all the way to godless Abba, the highest level, where Chachma is reaching its full maturity, Shenizbar Le'il, as was discussed earlier, the Kashanim Shachim B'chinas Primis HaChachma, Oz HaMidas Hein L'mayla Mahatfa, L'gamni, V'B'chinas Sichli Mamish. Yeah. What we learned was that when a person reaches that level, the Midas are no longer the naturally wired Midas, Hatfa, Mutfa, but the Midas themselves become the level of Muskel. Sichli Mamish, because the midas initially are about self-interest. That self-interest first says, okay, God is good for me. Then you come to a point that's higher than good for me. The midas themselves, remember, they catapult Bina all the way to higher levels. It's no longer the moichin guiding and training the midas, but the midas get elevated to the point that the entire midah is completely consumed with godliness. So the subjectivity of the midah is not about self, but about God. That's what he said earlier. So that's the avodah of this level, that midas, vavke, have become like yudke. I'll explain this more. This goes back to what we learned a lot earlier. But because it's going to get a little more complicated now, I think I'm going to stop right here. The Vahu Gamkein is going to continue explaining this, but there's a lot to unpack here. So Kibud Aveim, he's explaining, is why this mitzvah does have something from the future, because it's the gili of this higher level of moichin, where Vavke becomes like Yudke. But we need to understand what that is. I'm just looking ahead for a moment. Yeah, he talks all about Kibud Aveim, the whole paragraph, all the way to the middle of page 1280. Then he goes to Gemilas Chasadim. So he's going to bring a second mitzvah, Gemilas Chasadim. I'm just wondering how many mitzvahs he actually spells out. Kibud Aveim and Gemilas Chasadim, I see. Talmud Torah, he's going to spell out. Okay. So he's going through them. I don't know all of them, but definitely some of them.
Are you taking any questions?
Yeah. So I'm going to stop right here. Let me just say where I'm going to stop. I'm stopping at the bottom of page 1279. And this needs more explanation, but I'll do this in the next classes. He's basically bringing it back to things we've learned earlier, but he's explaining now why certain mitzvahs, you get an actually gili of Yudke, not just Yudke through Mem Tzadik and Vovke. That's the clinching point. But go ahead. I'm going to stop here.
So I understand what the point he's making is, that the revelation of Yud K in the Vav K, or Vav K will be elevated Yud K, saying it said differently. It raises an interesting question though about La Silabon, Olam Haba, after the Gula. We talked. The question is whether the structure of the universe, the Shteder Ishtalshalis, and the different spheros. I think we said that that structure will remain intact. It's not going to we had a whole discussion about whether it's going to be conflated or it's going to stay intact. And I think we concluded it was going to stay intact. There was going to be a revelation of Elokus throughout, but it doesn't mean that the structure itself would be, it would fold in on itself. Nevertheless, what he says over here now, it sounds like essentially this elevation of exactly how he said it, but it suggested that the lower levels, the lower spheres would be elevated to the level of Chachma Bina, which suggests that there would be sort of a reordering, a restructuring, a conflation, if you will. Do you understand the question?
This is the whole 50 pages. That's what Avodah does.
Mhm.
That's called the growth of a person. We grow first from a child into a older child, and we mature. That's the maturity process of emotions. As a person grows from self-interest to the cognitive emotions, to the emotional cognitive, all the way to these highest levels. That is exactly the work that we will do. That's what's expected of all of us, to grow. And as we grow, we expand our channels. As we expand our channels, we're able to draw down higher levels of divine energy, all the way to the Atzmi. Like he spoke there about how Chachma Abina and Chachma Abba V'ima gaze at Arich and Atik. The person comes completely consumed with the divine. That affects the emotions and the cognitive, everything we learned earlier. That's exactly what growth is about. Now, the full revelation of it all, in the fullest sense of the word, will be lost in love. And yet we have an elements of it that we can experience now as well, to some extent. So I'm not clear what you're asking. You're talking about La'asid Love now, you're talking about now, before La'asid Love. Before La'asid Love, we have elements of this. This is called, just like we say, on Yom Kippur, you have a higher revelation of a divine experience than in a regular day of the year.
Yeah, no, I don't think that's, the question is whether, I guess it's more, not so much at a personal level, but at a universal level.
What's the question? I'm not clear. Is the question whether the structure of existence will cease to be? So is that what you're asking?
Yeah, yeah.
You're talking about in the future.
Future, and I'm not saying it's going to be. I thought we
talked about this at length, that there's going to be both. That the structure will be expanded and elevated, and it'll be both. We said, not sure what Etzem Begili, Dira B'Tachteinim.
Okay. All right, so there's no inconsistency. That I was just probing. Okay, I forgot that we concluded it was going to be both. I forgot the maskana, the conclusion we came to. Okay.
Any other questions?
Yeah, you had brought down that about the Sikh from Rabbi in volume Chaf A about mitzvahs and Talmud Torah. I have Chaf A here. Remember which parsha it was in?
Vayigash.
Yeah. Very.
Okay.
So at a practical level, the mitzvah of kibbut av v'em and this elevation of the Vav K to Yud K, or the Zum to Chachma Bina. Can you say at a practical level, the issue, the sort of another way of saying it was sort of the selflessness of the mitzvah of honoring your parents means you're sort of getting out of your own personal interest and you're honoring your parents, even though it may not be convenient, and maybe you're not sort of, there's no cheshik, there's no like natural desire to do it. There should be, but maybe there isn't. Maybe your parents weren't so nice to you, whatever. But you do it anyways because it's a selfless act, and then that selflessness elevates your own selfish internal instincts to a higher level where you're not just so focused on yourself. And so too, the idea of the lower midas gazing, of raising up the Chachma Bina to basically elevate the lower levels of personality characteristics, to the point where they're focusing more on God than something outside of themselves, something higher, meaning God's will, as opposed to what I feel like doing. I don't feel like taking care of it. I'm going to do it anyways because that's what I'm supposed to do, because it's going to actually help me get out of my own selfishness.
Is Vavke elevating to Yudke, Midas to Moichin, correct? You want to spell it out in that basic level? I probably wouldn't do that, but yes, you could, on a practical level, spell it out that way, that it's moving from, the subjective Midas elevated to the Moichin level of Chacham Bina, of Kibbud Av V'Eim, yeah. But we're still middle of this mitzvah. It's going to go through another two-thirds of this page and next half of next page. So he's going to talk more about this. So
okay,
yeah.
Why wouldn't you go that practically? I'm just curious. Why do you think it's not that direct of a metaphor?
Because the Rebbe Rashab would say it if he did thought that's what he wanted to say. Can you make such an application in simple terms? You could. You can apply it that way. I think here it's a lot higher than that, than just inconvenient and going. Here he's talking about actually moving from deep levels of high emotional subjectivity to higher levels of objectivity. But you know, you can, as I said, this is, if you always personalize it. If you personalize this way and it works, I always say that's a way of understanding it, by trying to personalize it. So that way, since it does work. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
It's not wrong. I'm just saying there's more to it. That's all.
Got it.
Don't forget, long life, that's the one that's attributed to Kibbud Av V'Eim more than anything in our folklore.
Yeah, the point he wants to bring out is how these mitzvahs, these specific mitzvahs, have more of a la'asad lave dimension. They help. They let's put it this way: it's more of a taste of the seamlessness that's created between physical and spiritual, or in this case, Yudke Vavke. And I'm sure there's going to be some mitzvahs that are going to be more the Gilui of Yudke. He's going to be spelling it out through these Perusayan, these mitzvahs, these Dvarim, Elohad Dvarim. So it's interesting how it's going to go here. Okay,
it's very interesting. The Tzedakah is not one of them. The Tzedakah, which is called the mitzvah, not one of these 10. Talmud Torah is not Tzedakah.
What's not? What do you say?
Of these 10, that you get the Karen of Perusayan, B'olam Hazeh, and you list the 10, Tzedakah is not one of those 10. But you would think it would be.
Gemilas Chasadim. Gemilas Chasadim.
Chasadim is not tzedakah. It's a different separate mitzvah. No.
So we're going to learn what they are, what they're not. Yeah, we're going to learn that.